He didn't just insult me, he auctioned off my dignity like it was a party trick. And the worst part? Everyone laughed, until they didn't. Hi, I'm Elise Carter, 36, a nurse practitioner from Denver who still keeps a box of handwritten thank you notes from patients in my closet like talismans, reminders that tenderness counts for something. Last night was my birthday. Cole, my husband, booked the Skyline room at the Airy, that glass-walled steakhouse that floats above the city like a jeweled spaceship. A blizzard had just cleared, leaving the streets lacquered with ice and the mountains biting at the horizon. 20 floors up, the room hummed with people who pronounce favor as opportunity. Partners from Cole's venture fund, a few founders he's grooming, 2 couples from his private golf club, and a local councilwoman, Cole's mother, is courting for a pet ordinance that helps their real estate empire. I'd asked for PHO and a movie. I got Magnum Cabernet and men explaining blockchain to each other, like they'd invented time. I wore a navy wrap dress that made me stand up straighter, and my mother's tiny opal studs, the ones she swore glowed brighter when you told the truth. Cole had texted a suggestion earlier, the black sheath from that boutique his mother loves. I picked the wrap anyway. Maybe because I wanted to remember I still make choices. Maybe because something inside me knew a funeral dress would be on the nose. When the soufflés landed, tall as cathedrals, Cole rose, signals all over his posture. Attention, please. Worship begins. He tapped a spoon to his glass and told a story about our humble beginnings, the bit he calibrates when investors bring their spouses. How he found me working nights. True. And saw potential. I was doing intake for uninsured patients, not auditioning to be saved. He made my compassion into a personality defect. Elise would give away our last dollar for someone else's stitches, he chuckled, squeezing my shoulder with 2 fingers like a paperclip. Laughter broke around the table, too eager, too polished. My face felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who smiles on command. Then came the trick. A waiter, boyish, nervous, a fresh burn mark on his wrist, presented a bill folder the size of a prayer book. Cole snapped it open with theatrical boredom, then tilted it toward the room. Big nights, big tabs, he said, flashing a number no one needed to see. But we keep our house in order. He closed the folder and set it in front of me with a soft click that echoed like a door locking. And Elise will take care of it. She loves being useful. There was a flutter of awkwardness. Forks paused midair, a cough from the councilwoman's husband. But Cole wasn't finished. He leaned down so only the nearest guests could hear and spoke in that tone he reserves for interns and waiters. A woman like you should be grateful anyone hauled you up here. He didn't say, looked your way. He said, hauled, like I was cargo, like my life before him was a broken elevator he heroically fixed. Something cracked open in me. Not a sob, not anger, a valve, a long, quiet hiss of clarity. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. I just stared at the city, the tiny red beads of taillights threading the dark, and counted my breaths the way I tell anxious patients to do, in 4, hold 4, out 4. I took the folder. I withdrew the card he didn't know existed, the one I built on my hospital salary and moonlighting at the free clinic. The one registered to Elise Turner, my maiden name I still use at the licensing board because habit is a stubborn kind of freedom. I signed without shaking. The waiter's eyes flicked to mine in a brief exchange of human language. I'm sorry. I know. Me too. Cole tossed his napkin like a white flag he'd never actually surrender, announced a nightcap at the beacon to whoever mattered enough to follow, and left me there with hurt shaped like a neat rectangle in my palm, and people suddenly fascinated by the table arrangements. Someone, one of the founders with a hoodie under his blazer, murmured, "Happy birthday," the way you say bless you, after a sneeze. But here's what no one at that table knew. That morning, while Cole was in the garage rehearsing a pitch into his windshield, I found a leather folio beneath the Tesla's trunk panel, maps of a development outside Boise, Shell LLCs with bird names, and a handwritten note in Cole's blocky print. Move before audit. Jam. Jam is his mother, Judith Ann. 2 weeks ago, I'd seen a woman's scarf in our dry cleaning with a hotel's monogram stamped discreetly into the hem. Not mine. Not his mother's. I'd photographed it against my palm for scale, the way nurses document a wound. I'd also been watching our joint account bleed little monthly consulting fees to a firm that lives in a post office box and has a website built from a template no one finished. I am not a forensic accountant. I am a woman who reads charts for a living. Patterns are patterns. So while Cole was clinking glasses, I was inventorying exits. I slipped the signed receipt into my clutch, not as a receipt, but as evidence. Date, time, witnesses, the way his voice made a room smaller. I asked for the manager, and, in the quiet vestibule by the elevators, I told her I'd like their training footage pulled. The cameras in the skyline room, the mic in the ceiling that monitors service quality. I understand privacy protocols, I said, calm as triage. But I believe I was verbally abused in your establishment tonight in a way that could affect your staff's safety and your liability. It wasn't a bluff. The manager's mouth flattened. She handed me a card with a direct line and wrote her personal email on the back. "We saw," she whispered, something like shame moving across her eyes. We did, in fact, see. When I finally stepped into the cold, the wind knifed through my coat, and I felt awake for the first time in months. In the reflection of the revolving door, I saw myself the way my patients sometimes see me. Steady, practical, a person you hand your fear to for a minute so you can breathe. My phone lit with messages. Cole's mother, optics matter, Elise. A partner's wife, are you okay? Without a question mark. 2 missed calls from a contact saved as unknown clinic board that I'd ignored all week because I already knew the voice would be a warning. I walked past the valet line, past the men in careful wool, and picked my way down the side stairs to the alley that smelled like rosemary and exhaust. I didn't cry in the Uber. I opened notes and made a list titled Stitches, Things That Close a Wound. 1. Call Maeve, friend since undergrad, now a hospital compliance officer with a soft spot for lost causes. 2. Photograph everything. 3. Check the licensing board portal. My name is still Turner there. Good. 4. Find out why Cole's mother is emailing the councilwoman from a family foundation account. 5. Remember, opals shine when you tell the truth. By dawn, my phone rattled across the nightstand with 23 missed calls from numbers that suddenly recognized my name. Panic is loud, guilt is louder. And yet, in the throbbing silence between rings, a thought arrived, clean as winter air. Maybe he spent years teaching me how to disappear because he was terrified of what would happen if I ever learned how to be seen. This is where I begin, with a bill I shouldn't have paid, a room full of people I don't need to impress, and a husband who mistook my quiet for weakness. He has no idea what a nurse does when bleeding starts. We don't scream, we don't freeze, we catalog, we compress, we call in help, and then, only then, we cut. By 6:12 a.m., the mountains were pink, and my kitchen smelled like yesterday's coffee and resolve. I brewed a fresh pot anyway, hospital strong, the kind that peels paint, and spread out everything on the island like I was prepping an OR, my notebook, a cheap thumb drive. Maeve once joked was too ugly to steal, 3 months of statements, and the leather folio I'd fished from the Tesla. I kept hearing the line he'd thrown at me, a woman like you, and realized there was a tell wedged in the cruelty. Not a wife like you or my wife, a category, an object, not Elise, not person. When you're trained to catch micro-shifts in vitals, you also catch the vocabulary of contempt. Maeve answered on the second ring, voice gravelly with sleep and 10 years of night shifts. If you're calling before sunrise, tell me who I need to sue or intubate. Compliance first, I said, and then the words came fast, like I'd been holding my breath for a year. The airy, the bill, the line, the secret scarf, the bird name LLCs, Judith Ann's initials. Maeve didn't interrupt. She just murmured, "Uh-huh," in the rhythm she saves, for patients reliving accidents so they don't drown in the telling. When I finally stopped, she whistled. "All right, Carter, I want you to do 3 things. 1. Forward me everything, including that manager's card. I'll pull the city's licensing and see what camera protocols they promised to the health department. Restaurants hate the phrase chain of custody. 2. Log into the DMV portal. Pull the title history on the Tesla. If there's a lien we don't know about or a sudden transfer, we'll see it. 3. Do you still have the prenup? We don't have a prenup, I said, rubbing the opal studs like worry beads. We had a postnup. Judith insisted after Cole's first fund closed. Said it would protect legacy assets. I signed it a month after Dad's funeral because I was too tired to fight and too proud to look broke. Find it, Maeve said, the gentleness gone. Photograph every page. If there's one of those morality kill switch clauses, or anything about reputational harm, we're not walking, we're running. I dug through the hall cabinet where manuals go to die and pulled a blue binder labeled Insurance in Cole's tidy block letters. The post-nuptial wasn't even tucked. It proudly lived under a tab titled Structure, like my life was a spreadsheet that needed formatting. I snapped photos, front, back, signatures, witnesses, and texted them to Maeve as a PDF. While I waited, I opened the folio again. Shell companies, Grey Wing, Starling, Kestrel. Someone had a birding app and ego to match. There were printouts from a consulting firm in Idaho, Cobalt Planning, with jam scribbled next to line items that looked like zoning fee donations. 2 invoices were stapled to a real estate flyer, a 5-parcel ribbon of bare land by an interstate exit, just far enough from Boise to smell like opportunity, and just close enough to bend a council vote if the right foundations weighed in. Maeve's text pinged. Page 11, Clause 8. Morals, plus. Public harm. If a spouse engages in conduct resulting in legal investigation, public scandal, or fiduciary breach, the other spouse retains all marital equity contributed post-execution. Elise, he wrote this to trap you if you embarrassed him. That blade cuts both ways. My heart tripped. I read it twice, 3 times. The language was unambiguous. The lawyerly smoothie of intent and reputational risk masked a simple fact. If Cole's actions triggered a legal probe or public scandal, he couldn't use the agreement to starve me. He'd built a cage and locked himself inside it. The garage door thundered open at 7:04 a.m., earlier than usual. I barely had time to sweep the binder into the pantry before Cole strode in, suit unbuttoned, tie in his fist like a leash. His eyes were swollen, his cologne overcompensated. He took in the coffee, the notepad, my face. You know that tiny pause before a patient tells you they're in pain? He had it. We need to talk, he said, which in Cole speak meant, I need to talk. You need to listen. In a second, I replied, pouring him coffee like it was 2019 and we were still nice to each other. Cream? He flinched. He hates when I don't rise to the bait. My mother called, he said, swallowing half the mug. She said you made a scene last night. I paid your bill, I said quietly. If that's a scene, I guess I'm Meryl Streep. Color climbed his neck. He set the mug down too hard, coffee leaping over the rim. You misunderstood the tone. You have to stop being so literal, Elise. Everyone jokes. This is how rooms like that work. And you, a woman like me? I asked, letting the words sit between us, cold and clinical. His jaw worked. You're twisting things. I studied him the way I study a bad ECG. Pattern first, then prognosis. That's when I noticed the scrape along his knuckles, raw and crescent-shaped like someone's ring had caught him, not mine. The scarf, the ring scrape, the hotel monogram. My mind drew a line through the data points, and the picture that emerged wasn't just an affair. It was a fight. Not last night, older, not with a stranger, familiar enough to hit. My stomach turned. Cole, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Where were you Tuesday? He blinked. Tuesday is poker night, his default alibi. You know where. I know where your Tesla's GPS says you idled for 40 minutes behind the Larkspur on 12th. I also know who texted you from a blocked number at 10:18 p.m. to bring the blue folder. I angled my phone just enough for him to catch the reflected glow. Bluff? No. I had the GPS because the DMV portal led me to the lean to the insurance app to the trip log. Maeve had pushed the domino. I let it fall. For a beat, the kitchen was nothing but the tick of the wall clock and the burn of coffee cooling. When Cole spoke again, his voice went low, persuasive. The sales deck. You're tired, he said. Night shift brain. You always get dramatic when you're overwrought. Look. He rounded the island, palms open. Let's reset. I'll call the airy and smooth last night. We'll take a weekend in Vail. Judith will book the spa. Judith will book the councilwoman, I said before I could stop myself, under the family foundation. His mouth froze mid-syllable, and then something ugly flickered across his face, faster than anger, older than shame. Careful, he said. You're talking about things you don't understand. Oh, I said softly. I understand enough to know you wrote yourself a trap and labeled it structure. I didn't show him the clause. I watched realization crawl over him anyway. He moved closer, too close, and pitched his voice coaxing. Elise, he breathed, a parody of tenderness. Don't do this. Do you hear me? Don't make enemies you can't afford. His fingers brushed the opal at my ear like he still owned naming rights to my body. The touch was small and searing. I stepped back so abruptly the stool legs screeched. His hand hovered where my throat had just been, empty. For 1 second the mask slipped and I saw the thing that lives under all that polish. The certainty that I am furniture in his tableau. When control fails, some men plead, some threaten, Cole calculates. He straightened, rolled his shoulders, made his mouth into a line an investor would trust. Fine, he said. You want to play? Here are the rules. If you go nuclear, if you embarrass me, if you drag my name through mud, I will pull every favor I've ever banked. I'll have the board review your license. I'll have Judith audit your clinic's donations. I'll have you painted as unstable. You skip meals, Elise. You fainted once in the medication room. You have fragility. There it was, the first flick of violence, not a shove or a slap, but the blueprint for erasure. I felt the old panic rise, hot, itchy, but it hit a wall I'd built while he was monologuing. I pictured my patients, Mr. Alvarez cracking jokes with a PICC line. B in room 214, braiding her daughter's hair with shaking hands, and I found my footing. You're threatening a licensed provider in her own kitchen, I said, steady. Also, this is wild. You just admitted you'd weaponize a foundation to influence a public official. Maybe save the monologues for a room without microphones. He sneered. What microphones? The ones the city requires when restaurants monitor service quality. I slid the manager's card across the counter with one finger. You performed for your friends. You forgot the room was taking notes. The mug shattered before I registered he'd thrown it. Ceramic starbursts at my feet, coffee arcing the cabinets. I didn't flinch. He did. He hadn't meant to lose motor control. For men like Cole, breaking is for other people. He stared at the mess like it had betrayed him. Look what you make me do, he said, and that sentence was my switch. My fear cooled into something harder. Pick it up, I said. Not a plea, a directive. And then get out of my kitchen. He laughed, short, disbelieving, and crouched to gather the shards with his bare hands, because he thinks bleeding is always someone else's problem. He nicked his thumb, hissed, and looked up at me like he wanted it to be my fault. I handed him a towel. He took it. He left without another word, the garage door swallowing him whole. I stood very still until the silence settled. Then I photographed the coffee spatter, the broken mug, the slice on the towel. Nurse's document. It's how we survive other people's stories. My hands shook only when I hit send to Maeve. Her reply came swift. Today, you're not alone. Call this number. It belonged to a woman named Priya Narayan, a securities attorney with a voice like a scalpel and a pro bono docket her partners complain about. Bring the post-nup, Priya said, and the bird companies. And Elise, wear whatever you want. You're not a prop in my conference room. I packed a bag, not a dramatic suitcase, just the canvas tote I take to the farmer's market. Charger, thumb drive, the folio, a sweater that smells like eucalyptus and laundry. I hesitated at the jewelry dish, then slid the opal studs into my pocket and replaced them with the tiny gold hoops I wore before Cole's world taught me to doubt small joys. At the door, I paused at the family photo we took on his mother's lawn, the one where Judith's hand on my shoulder looks supportive if you don't know pressure points. I took it down, flipped it, and with a pen wrote in neat block letters, I'm not your project. As I locked up, the front camera pinged, motion detected. Through the fisheye lens, I watched a familiar profile ascend the steps, Judith, immaculate at 8:03 a.m., winter coat the color of dry martini, heels silent on our slate. She didn't knock, she typed the code. The system chirped denied. I'd changed it 10 minutes earlier. She smiled at the camera, a chilly crescent. Then she held up something between two fingers, small and black and sticky, an AirTag. She pressed it under the porch sconce with the casual intimacy of a woman tucking hair behind an ear. Twist one, I thought, heart thundering and hilariously alive. The humiliation wasn't an accident, it was a dress rehearsal. and the audience had been seated long before I arrived. I froze in the stairwell of my own home, watching that tiny black disc gleam under the porch light. Judith didn't just want to track me, she wanted me to see it. That was her style. Humiliation served chilled, with garnish. Nurses know when someone's pushing a dosage beyond therapeutic. It's never about medicine, it's about power. Judith's AirTag was the same. She wanted me to choke on the knowledge that she could always find me, even in escape. I slipped out the back door instead, tote slung over my shoulder, sneakers crunching on the crusted snow. The alley stank of wet cardboard and somebody's forgotten Christmas tree, but it felt like freedom. My car was parked 2 blocks over, an ancient Civic with more miles than a traveling nurse, and just as stubborn. I'd left it in my maiden name, Elise Turner, half because I never got around to changing the title, half because some part of me knew I'd need it. When the engine caught, coughing like an old smoker, I whispered, "Good girl," and patted the dashboard. At 8:40 a.m., I was seated in Priya's office downtown, a space that smelled like ink and ambition. She wore her hair in a knot sharp enough to slice through lies, and her desk was a battlefield of case files, color-coded tabs sprouting like flags. She didn't waste time with sympathy. "Show me." I laid out the folio, the Bird Company invoices, the post-nut pages Maeve had marked with digital highlights. Priya scanned with a predator's focus, her pen clicking like a metronome of judgment. When she reached Clause 8, her lips curved, not in kindness, but in satisfaction. "Well, well. He thought he was building a cage for you, but he forgot cages can trap whoever's inside when the locks turn." I slid over the manager's card from the airy, my thumb smudging the ink. "There's audio, maybe video. He humiliated me publicly. His investors heard every word." Priya tapped the card against the desk. "Good, that's leverage. And if those partners confirm it under oath, we have reputational harm plus cruelty. Judges like clean categories." I hesitated, then added the photos, the scarf, the GPS log, the towel with his blood. Priya's brows arched slightly. "You're thorough." "I'm a nurse," I said. "Documentation keeps us from killing people." Her eyes softened just for a moment, then sharpened again. "Coal is reckless, Elise. These shell companies? Amateur Hour. Grey Wing LLC filed articles of incorporation from a UPS store. Starling lists your address as its registered agent. Did you know that?" My stomach pitched. "No." "Then congratulations. You're technically the officer of a company that's laundering something through Boise dirt." She leaned back, temple resting against her knuckles. "If he thinks he can throw you under a bus, he's already drawn the map." My chest tightened. "Can he?" Priya smiled without warmth. "Not if we drive the bus first." She laid out the battle plan like a surgeon explaining a procedure. Step 1, secure independent accounts in my name. Step 2, prepare emergency filings for protective orders, financial and physical. Step 3, discreetly approach one of his partners, someone ready to jump ship, to corroborate. Step 4, use the morality clause to freeze assets before Cole can funnel more through his mother's pet foundations. "The key," Priya said, "is timing. We don't pull the trigger until the evidence is heavy enough to crush him on contact." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then flipped it over. "Your husband's already moving," she said. "Word on the street is he scheduled an impromptu partners' dinner tonight. He's going to spin last night as Elise's breakdown. That's how men like him do damage control. Recast cruelty as your instability." I pressed the opals in my ears until the posts bit skin. Then I guess I need to stop being quiet. Priya's gaze was level, fierce. "Are you ready to set yourself on fire, Elise? Because once we start, there's no going back. He'll come for you with everything." I thought of the AirTag Judith had pressed under the porch light like a curse, of the towel blooming with Cole's blood where the mug shards had bit him, of Maeve's steady voice saying, "Don't walk, run." I let the silence stretch, then nodded. He already lit the match. I'm just deciding where to throw it. Priya handed me a burner phone. "Keep this on you. Only call me or Maeve with it. Assume your home is compromised. Assume your car is tagged. Assume your husband is already crafting a story that ends with you medicated and silenced. We'll write a different ending." On the street outside, the air was sharp with diesel and frost. I tucked the phone into my tote and kept walking until my Civic came into view. Someone had scraped a word into the salt dust on the driver's side door. Grateful. The letters were clumsy but deliberate. My pulse thundered in my throat. Judith didn't just want to track me, she wanted to script me. Twist two, I thought, fumbling for my keys. They weren't just watching, they were already writing my lines. I stood there staring at the word carved into my Civic, the cold air burning my lungs. Grateful. The same poison Cole spat at me last night, now traced into the dirt of my own car. This wasn't random vandalism, this was orchestration. Judith and Cole wanted me to know they could reach into any corner of my life, even the ones I thought were mine alone. My car was no longer just transportation, it was a billboard screaming their script. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos from every angle. Documentation? Always. Then I crouched, fingers trembling, and checked under the bumper. Sure enough, another AirTag, this one wedged into a strip of duct tape. I yanked it free, its surface still warm from the Civic's engine block. My reflection warped across its shiny shell. Tired eyes, clenched jaw. A woman who suddenly understood that escape wasn't just about leaving, it was about outplaying. Maeve answered my call on the first ring. Talk. They tagged my car, wrote grateful in the dirt. They're building a narrative before I can. Maeve swore under her breath. Classic. They'll claim you're paranoid, imagining trackers, vandalizing your own car for attention. We need to flip it. How? I asked, gripping the AirTag so hard it cut crescents into my palm. Chain of custody, she said. Drop it at the precinct. File a report. Doesn't matter if the cops roll their eyes. What matters is timestamp. Paper trail. Later, when Cole swears you staged it, we'll have evidence you treated it as harassment from the start. By the time I left the precinct, clutching the thin carbon copy of a report the officer filed with board detachment, I felt lighter. Not safe, but armored. I tucked the AirTag into an evidence bag Priya had given me that morning, labeled it in my neatest nurse's handwriting, and stored it in the tote like a scalpel waiting for its turn. That evening, Maeve texted, "Check the local feed, now." I pulled into a gas station lot, hands still slick from pumping fuel, and opened my phone. There it was, a glossy Instagram story from one of Cole's partner's wives, tagged at the Redwood Club. The caption read, "Dinner with the team. Sending love to Elise, hoping she gets the help she needs." A photo showed Cole at the head of a long mahogany table, glass raised, grin perfectly calibrated. Amber, the councilwoman's aide he once swore was just logistics, sat beside him, her hand a little too familiar on his arm. Heat climbed my throat. They weren't just rewriting the story, they were premiering it. Elise, the unstable. Elise, the fragile nurse who fainted at work. Elise, the wife who couldn't handle pressure. And Cole, the noble husband, gallantly shouldering the burden of a wife unraveling. I typed back to Maeve with shaking fingers. They're framing me already? Her reply came fast. Good. Let them. Every lie they tell digs the hole deeper when we drop receipts. You have the footage, the clause, the tracker report. Don't react yet. Just keep stacking evidence. Priya says timing is everything. You'll know when it's time to strike. I sat in the Civic, engine humming under me, scrolling through the photo again. Cole's laugh was so wide, so easy. For years I thought that laugh meant warmth. Now I saw it for what it was, the sound of a man rehearsing his lines before the audience clapped. I opened notes and added a new line under stitches. Step 6, steal the script back. And in that moment, for the first time, I didn't just want survival, I wanted stage lights. By midnight my phone lit up again. This time not with Instagram poison, but with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something in me, the nurse instinct that hears danger in silence, made me swipe. Elise Carter? The voice was male, low, clipped. This is Detective Harris, Financial Crimes. Your attorney, Ms. Narayan, shared preliminary documents with our office. I need to confirm. Do you have possession of original invoices linked to Graywing LLC? My pulse jumped. They were moving faster than I expected. Yes, I said carefully, eyes darting to the folio in my tote. But they're copies Cole kept in our home. Originals probably live at his office. Copies are fine for now. We've had other complaints. Patterns match. A pause. Deliberate. Do not confront him directly. If he suspects you're cooperating, we lose advantage. Understood? Yes. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, the Civic's heater wheezing against the frost, and laughed under my breath. Cole thought he was painting me unstable, while federal detectives were quietly sketching him as a thief. He had no idea the ground was already buckling. The next morning, I parked outside Lincoln Elementary. My badge still let me in, though my stomach twisted at the thought that Cole could yank my license with a single whisper to the board. I needed to feel the kids' noise, the chaos of construction paper and glue, something unscripted. But when I stepped into my classroom, the desk phone blinked with a voicemail. The receptionist's voice came through thin and nervous. "Elise?" There was a call from Mr. Carter. He said you're unwell, that you shouldn't be left alone with children until further notice. My blood iced. This was it, his first real strike. He wasn't waiting. He was already sliding me into the role of unstable wife, right here in the only place that had ever been mine. I walked straight to Principal Myers's office, my tote heavy against my hip. She looked up from her computer, concern etched deep. "Elise, I got a call. Is everything is documented," I cut in, placing the precinct's harassment report on her desk, then Priya's card. "My husband is under investigation for financial crimes. He's trying to discredit me before the truth surfaces. Please, Principal Myers, do not let him use this school as his stage." She read the report slowly, her lips pressing thin. Then she nodded once, sharp. "You've always been steady here, Elise. More than steady. You're safe with us." Relief nearly buckled me. But it was a fragile relief, like a sandbag holding back floodwater. Cole wouldn't stop, Judith wouldn't stop. The smear campaign was already rehearsed. This was just the opening act. That night Maeve called, her voice vibrating with urgency. "Elise, listen carefully. One of Cole's partners, Evan Blake, just left the Redwood in a fury. Apparently Cole threw him under the bus about some bad investment. Evan texted me. He wants to talk. He's ready to flip." My breath caught. This was the missing witness, the corroboration Priya said we needed. When? "Tomorrow morning. Neutral ground." He suggested a diner off I-70, the kind of place no one from Cole's circle would be caught dead. I felt the opal studs warm against my skin, almost like approval. Finally, a crack in his perfect wall. A partner willing to testify that Cole wasn't just cruel, he was dirty. Twist 3, I thought, gripping the phone. Tomorrow, the story starts breaking in half. The diner was one of those highway stops where the coffee tastes like burnt hope and the vinyl booths stick to your thighs. I slid into the back corner at 9:02 a.m., tote tucked tight to my side, heart hammering. Evan Blake was already there, suit jacket folded beside him, sleeves rolled up like he'd been wrestling his conscience all night. He was younger than Cole, early 40s maybe, with the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd realized too late that the fire he was feeding was eating him alive. "Elise." His voice cracked around my name. "I shouldn't even be here, but—" He rubbed both hands over his face. "What he did to you at the Airy, that wasn't just cruelty, that was strategy. Judith told him humiliation is the fastest way to neutralize a spouse. Break you in public, no one believes you in private." I swallowed hard, bile rising. "So it was rehearsed?" "Everything's rehearsed." Evan leaned forward, whispering like the walls could betray him. "Even the dinner tab. He put it on a corporate card first, then had it reversed this morning to pin it as a domestic expense under your name. The man thinks 6 moves ahead. He's been building a file that paints you as reckless, unstable, financially irresponsible. He calls it his exit insurance." My stomach dropped. "He wants to make me look like the liability." Evan nodded. "He's already telling the partners you've been draining funds, that you're addicted to prescription meds. He even floated a story that you hit him last week." Shock rattled through me. "Prescription meds?" I barely touched ibuprofen. "He's manufacturing abuse claims." Evan's eyes darted to the window, then back. "Look, I can't undo what I've enabled, but I can give you what I found." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, photocopies of wire transfers, meeting notes, a draft agenda for an emergency partner session. Cole's name circled. Evan's scrawled note in the margin, "Jam," directing from behind the curtain. My hands shook as I flipped through. These weren't just breadcrumbs. They were whole loaves of evidence. Links between Cole's Bird LLCs and Judith's charitable foundations. Money siphoned from investor accounts into shell holdings. Fraud so clumsy it screamed arrogance. "Why help me?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Because I watched my own wife walk out last year with nothing but a duffel bag," Evan whispered, voice thick. "Judith shredded her in court, painted her as unstable until she lost custody of our kids. I did nothing. And when I saw what they did to you, Elise, I realized silence makes me complicit twice." Something inside me softened, but only for a second. You'll testify? If it keeps another woman from being erased, yes, but you have to move fast. Tonight, Cole's staging a retreat at the mountain lodge. He'll pitch the partners on a new structure. Translation, he's burying money before investigators freeze it. A shiver ran through me. How long do I have? Hours. Evan checked his watch. And Elise, be careful. Judith's not just cleaning money, she's cleaning people. If she thinks you're a liability, she won't hesitate. I left the diner clutching the envelope, the opal studs burning hot against my skin like a warning. The snowy wind cut my cheeks raw as I slid into the Civic, envelope locked against my chest. Twist 4 was already unfolding. Cole wasn't just trying to discredit me. He was preparing to erase me entirely, from finances, from credibility, maybe even from existence. I didn't drive straight home. Instinct said no straight lines. Instead, I circled the block 3 times, then ducked into a strip mall lot behind a shuttered pharmacy. My hands shook as I opened the manila envelope again, letting the diner's smell of grease and coffee fade into the sting of cold air through my cracked window. The transfers were damning, 7-figure sums drifting through Graywing, Starling, Kestrel. Dates matched Cole's so-called business trips. And in the margins, Evan had scribbled initials, Jam, like a ghost signature on every page. Judith Ann Mitchell's hand was everywhere. I pulled out the burner phone Priya gave me. She answered on the first buzz, her tone clipped, surgical. Talk. I have documents. Evan Blake handed me proof, transfers, shell companies, even notes about tonight's retreat. He says Cole is burying money before the freeze hits. Priya's inhale was sharp. Send scans now, don't carry the originals. Hide them. If they know you've got this, you're not just a liability, you're a target. Already am, I said, voice thin. They tagged my car, they called my principal, they're planting prescriptions I've never taken. Judith left an AirTag under my porch light like a calling card. A pause. Then, Jesus Christ, okay, listen. Tonight you stay out of sight. Let Cole play his mountain theater. Tomorrow morning, I walk into court with this packet and freeze him so hard he'll wish for bankruptcy. You understand me? Survival is your only job tonight. I promised, but promises feel cheap when danger is tailored in your size. By 5 p.m., Denver was cloaked in snow again, the sky bruised purple. I sat in Emma's driveway, my sister's house, 2 suburbs over, clutching my tote. Emma opened the door before I could knock, her nurse scrubs smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion. God, Elise, your face. She pulled me into a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. I wanted to collapse right there, spill everything, but the sound of tires crunching on fresh snow snapped us apart. Headlights cut across the driveway. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. Too polished for neighbors, too deliberate for coincidence. Emma's voice dropped. They followed you. No, I whispered, throat tight. They herded me. The passenger window lowered. Judith's profile glowed in the dashboard light, martini calm. She didn't get out. She didn't have to. A man in a dark coat did. Tall, broad, no expression. He walked halfway up the drive, then stopped, like he was measuring the distance. Emma grabbed my hand hard. Inside, now. We bolted, slamming the door, locking it, pulling curtains shut. My niece Mia peeked down from the stairs, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that makes you older in an instant. Mom, who's that? Emma lied with a nurse's steadiness. Just someone lost, honey. Go back upstairs. But when Mia's footsteps faded, Emma turned to me, her voice shaking with rage. This isn't intimidation anymore, Elise. This is escalation. I pressed my toad against my chest, the envelope crinkling inside like a heartbeat. Judith wasn't just watching. She was sending a message. You don't move without my permission. Twist 5 had arrived, uninvited, parked right at my sister's curb. We shouldn't have answered the door. I keep repeating that in my head like a prayer, because sometimes the only way to survive is to admit you were almost foolish. But Emma opened it, because she's a good person, and because she always thinks she can reason with bad faith. The man on our stoop didn't wear a face. He wore that corporate blankness that means he's been paid to be unseen. He introduced himself as Mr. Hale, Private Security, his voice manufactured to sound casual. He asked if Elise Carter was home. He said nothing about apologies or mistakes, only questions wrapped in polite menace. Take your business elsewhere, Emma said, her nurse instincts sharpening her tone. She put herself between him and the door like a human doorstop. He smiled the way predators smile when the small creatures make noise. "We just want to talk," he said. "Miss Carter's husband is worried. About her safety, about the optics. He asked us to make sure you're not being harassed by anyone connected to this investigation." His hand brushed the holster at his hip as if to remind us he wasn't just a messenger. When Mia stepped down the stairs barefoot, clutching a stuffed rabbit, the man's eyes flicked like a cold light scanning for vulnerability. "Tell your aunt to leave town," he said, unnervingly casual, "for her own good." The words were soft on his lips and heavy in our kitchen. Emma laughed, half hysteria, half fury, and told him to get off the property. He laughed too, that thin sound that tells you he's been paid to hold the line between intimidation and assault. Then, before any adult in the room could react, he pushed Emma, hard. She stumbled back into the banister, fingers white where she gripped the rail. Mia screamed in a voice that split the air. Something in me slammed forward like a reflex. I didn't think about law or strategy. I moved like a nurse moves when a patient is coding, purposeful and without option. I grabbed his wrist, locked his arm, and pulled him off balance. He shoved me into the hallway, and the world narrowed to the smell of his cologne and the pounding of my heart. For a staccato second, the man's smile faltered, maybe surprised that a woman in a cardigan would fight back. Then he swung. His shoulder caught my ribs and heat flared across my side. The breath whooshed from me, and I tasted copper, like fear laced with iron. Emma lunged, tackling him by the thigh. He hit the floor, a solid heap of suit and training. He scrambled toward the door. Emma grabbed his ankle, and the two of them skidded across the mat in a tangle of limbs and curses. Somebody, our neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, had seen the whole thing from his window and was on his phone before the man could get to his feet. Sirens wailed, the sound of consequence arriving. The man cursed, spat something about legal counsel, and bolted into the cold, like a shadow trying to outrun a searchlight. By the time the patrol car rolled up, he was gone, but his presence had left fingerprints. Scuffed mud on our porch, a torn tag from a security jacket caught on the railing, and a cigarette butt smoldering in the snow that didn't belong to any of us. The officers took statements with the gentle boredom of people who see domestic drama every week, but they also bagged that cigarette and photographed the torn tag. Evidence, even small, can be a hinge. Later, when the adrenaline faded and Mia clung to me like sap to bark, Priya sat at our kitchen table with a thermos of coffee and a face like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "You did exactly the right thing," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Physical evidence, witnesses, a neighbor who called. We'll trace that security jacket. Companies don't like to be linked to trespass and assault." She tapped the cigarette's bagged envelope as if it were a chess piece. "And that torn tag? It may point to the vendor Cole used for his corporate security. We can follow that thread." Emma hugged me until my ribs stopped aching. Mia slept on the couch that night, the rabbit clutch so tight the stuffing jammed her fingers. I lay awake, feeling the bruise bloom under my ribs like a dark moon. For the first time since Cole slammed that bill folder on the table, fear and fury were both honest with me. They kept me awake, but they didn't immobilize me. We photographed bruises, saved messages, filed supplemental reports with the precinct. Detective Harris called at 2 a.m., a voice grave and careful. "We're compiling. Stay with family for now. Don't confront him. We'll be in touch." Then he added softer, "You did good tonight." That line, "You did good tonight," felt like a medal, not for victory, but for surviving the first round of what was becoming a war. The stakes had risen. It was no longer simply about freezing assets or reputations. It was about safety. The bruises, the torn tag, the cigarette. These small things began to look like a map to undoing them. And the map, for the first time, felt navigable. Morning light sliced through Emma's blinds like interrogation lamps. My ribs ached, but it was nothing compared to the nausea of knowing Cole and Judith wouldn't stop. They'd just regroup. Over coffee that tasted like burnt hope, Emma muttered, "You need a safe house, Elise. Not just my couch. Somewhere they can't send goons with fake business cards." Before I could answer, Priya strode in, trench coat dusted with snow, hair pinned into its usual no-nonsense knot. She dropped a folder on the kitchen table. "They escalated? Good. We escalate back." I flipped the folder open. Inside were printouts of corporate filings, each page screaming arrogance in black and white. Starling LLC listed my home address as its registered office. Kestrel LLC listed Cole's mother as the managing director. Graywing LLC had a typo in the articles spelled investments. Priya smirked. Sloppy criminals are my favorite kind. They leave paper trails like breadcrumbs. Emma frowned. But how does this stop them sending muscle to our door? Priya leaned forward, eyes like scalpels. We don't just freeze assets. We build leverage so nuclear they beg us to stop. That security contractor last night, already traced. He works freelance for a firm Cole's fund retained last quarter. Payroll records show Judith authorized his check. Emma swore under her breath. So she sent him? Exactly, Priya said. That's not intimidation anymore. That's conspiracy. If we can link her direct authorization to what happened in your driveway, we've got enough for both civil damages and criminal exposure. I pressed the folder flat with my palm, my hand trembling. But Cole's already spinning me as unstable. Last night's stunt will just become part of their story. Fragile Elise provoked security. Priya slid another document across the table. Not if we control the narrative. Evan Blake's testimony buys us credibility. And this, she tapped the precinct's carbon copy of my harassment report. This shows you documented before the assault. Pattern of stalking, tracking, intimidation. Judges love patterns. They can't unsee them. I thought of the diner envelope still hidden under Emma's guest bed, and my chest tightened. Then we need to hit first. Priya's mouth curved. Correct. Which is why tomorrow morning, we file an emergency petition to freeze Starling and Graywing. Tonight you'll stay with Maeve. Different address, different neighborhood. They expect you here. They'll waste energy watching this house while we move. Emma stiffened. I don't like her leaving. What if they... Priya cut her off gently. Emma, you saw what happened last night. They're escalating. Elise is safest when they don't know where she is. Trust me, I've buried men like Cole in paperwork before they knew they were standing in a grave. The certainty in her tone steadied me, but fear still clung like static. If I move to Maeve's, how do we keep Emma and Mia safe? Priya's eyes narrowed. We file a restraining order tonight. It won't keep them from circling, but it creates another line of evidence when they inevitably breach it. Every violation becomes a nail in their coffin. Emma slid her hand over mine, warm and trembling. Then go, Elise. We'll handle the wolves at the door. Just promise me you'll burn them down. I squeezed back. No promises, I said, my voice low. Just inevitability. And as I zipped my tote, the bruises on my ribs throbbing like battle drums, I realized they thought last night was intimidation. But what they'd actually given me was admissible evidence, a living witness, and the resolve of a sister who'd fight tooth and nail. Twist 6 had arrived, and this time it wasn't theirs. It was mine. I left Emma's house at dusk. The sky bruised the same color as the mark forming under my ribs, and Maeve met me with a thermos of soup and a duffel that smelled like eucalyptus, and an office that knew how to hide people. Her apartment was functional. No marble, no flattering lighting, just a couch with a sag that felt like an honest backrest, and a drawer full of spare chargers. We'll make a command center, she said, as if we were about to run a small, very righteous war. She made coffee that tasted like a blanket and handed me a paper cup with both hands. You look like you slept in pamphlets of worry. We did not sleep. That's not heroic, just practical. Priya emailed me the emergency petition at 2:17 a.m., the time stamped in her header like a small secret thunderclap. It was surgical. Application to freeze assets, emergency hearing request, affidavits attached from Evan Blake, and Henry the manager at the Airy, the precinct report, the security footage Henry promised to hand over, and Margaret Chin's recorded practice-run testimony where Bradley rehearsed perjury. Each document was a rail in the trap we were building. I printed everything on Maeve's ancient printer that coughed like a bad patient, collated it into neat stacks and labeled them with duct tape tabs in my best handwriting. Nurses like lists. They keep chaos from metastasizing. At 10:00 a.m., Priya walked into the courthouse with me trailing like a guilty apostle. The judge we got looked like someone who ate ethics for breakfast and discipline for lunch. Small, sharp glasses, eyes that didn't sleep. Priya presented the petition like an exhibit. Your Honor, we request an immediate asset freeze and injunctive relief based on an ongoing federal investigation and the clear pattern of intimidation against Ms. Carter. She didn't do theatrics. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke in a language that isn't polite. Paper trails, timestamps, witnesses who had nothing to gain. We won the temporary freeze in an hour. The judge's pen scratched the order across the page in a heartbeat that felt like someone closing a door on a bad wind. I felt dizzy with relief, thin, scary relief that tasted like cold metal. Priya hugged me once, quick, like we'd both been told not to get too sentimental in front of the clerks. "This holds for now," she said. "But it's a surgical bandage, not a cure. They'll try to cut it." They tried sooner than we expected. That afternoon, a press cycle started to whir like a nervous fly. Someone, no one nice, had leaked a sanitized version of Cole's narrative. Family disruption due to unwell spouse. The city was cruel and efficient. Rumor traffics faster than truth. I watched myself transform into headlines I never chose. My name was a coin being flipped between pity and rumor. I felt my privacy thin, like tape on paper, edges curling. But then the phone rang, Detective Harris, voice calmer than the city noise. "We executed subpoenas this morning," he said. "Banks are cooperating. We pulled transactions linked to Graywing. The SEC just called. They're digging in. We're running concurrent probes." His tone was a slow, steady metronome. "One more thing. Your footage from the Airy is cleaner than Henry said. There's audio where your husband admitted to planning the dinner as a demonstration of value. That's pretty clear." My knees went weak enough I had to sit. The audio, Cole's voice, cold and precise, was now not just an echo in a restaurant, but evidence in a federal file. I thought of the opals tucked into my pocket. I thought of every detail we'd documented. Each small, stubborn act of documentation had become a ladder. Meanwhile, Cole's camp pivoted. His PR team released a short statement about stress and family strain. His mother called Emma, voicemail dripping with wounded aristocracy, pleading for privacy and hinting that the trouble must be worked through within the family. She sounded like a woman who believed in private cruelty as a virtue. I felt a brief pulse of pity and then buried it. Judith had sown seeds of ruin for years. Pity was an indulgence I couldn't afford. That night, Cole texted me 3 times. The first was a terse, "We can settle this quietly." The second, a late-typed apology that read like a press release. The third was a live attempt at charm, an old photograph of us at a summer fair, our faces young and unscathed. I stared at that photo until the pixels blurred, and I wondered, did he ever see me in those moments, or only as a before image to his after? The next morning, federal agents arrived at the funds office with boxes and dogs and polite but final authority. The partners watched with faces that had practiced surprise so often they'd learned the muscle memory of it. They were scared, not for morality, but for money. Evan Blake texted me a photo of Cole boxed behind a wall of subpoenaed files, and beneath it a thumbs-up emoji. "It's happening," he wrote. Cole's arrest happened fast. Not a movie arrest with lights and handcuffs and triumphant orchestral music, just 2 agents who read him his rights, a hand on his elbow, bewilderment creasing his forehead in a way no public speech ever had. He looked small under that bright office ceiling, not because he'd shrunk, but because the scaffolding of his lies had been sawed underfoot. His eyes searched the room for someone to punish, me, anyone, and found only partners who'd called their lawyers. I didn't dance. That would feel cheap. Instead, I sat on Maeve's couch and breathed. Relief, again, solid and dangerous. I cried, a wet, odd surrender that felt like releasing pressure. Maeve wrapped a blanket around me and made tea with too much honey. "You did the right thing," she said, and I let the affirmation land where doubt had lived for months. But paperwork does not preclude consequence. Cole's lawyers fired back with their best play, claim entrapment, claim selective memory, claim stress-induced misinterpretation of spicy dinner banter. They hired a clinical psychologist to assess me, an expected move to portray me as unstable. We'd braced for this. Priya had scheduled baseline evaluations with independent clinicians and pulled my performance reviews from the clinic where I worked. Our defense was not only evidence, but demonstration, an unassailable record of competence. The media would try to carve both of us into digestible archetypes, villain and victim, madwoman and mastermind. I refused to fit their boxes. I refused to be grateful for humiliation. I refused to be the before picture. Our case had become a messy human thing. Theft, betrayal, violence, and an attempt to gaslight the person whose job it had been to heal. That night, curled under Maeve's blanket, I replayed Cole's voice. A woman like you should be grateful. The memory hit me differently now, not as a weight, but as a fuse he lit himself. The room was quiet around me, but the world had new edges. The fight wasn't over. There were depositions, subpoenas, and hearings ahead, procedures that feel like teeth being filed. But for the first time in a long time, I could see a horizon that wasn't a repeated pattern of erasure. The first deposition was scheduled for a gray Tuesday. I wore a simple navy blazer, not designer, not meant to impress anyone but myself. Priya warned me the defense would come hard, trying to paint me unstable, manipulative, a wife scorned. They'll aim for cracks, she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. Your job is to be concrete, no cracks, just stone. Cole sat across from me in that sterile conference room, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they'd rather be billing oil companies than salvaging his reputation. He still wore power like cologne, but it no longer masked the sweat of desperation. His eyes scanned me with the old contempt, but beneath it I saw something new. Calculation tinged with fear. The questions came fast. Did you suffer from anxiety? Ever take medication? Did you raise your voice at your husband? Did you ever leave work early due to fatigue? They wanted fragility on record. I answered each one in a steady tone, hands folded, eyes level. Yes, I once fainted from skipping lunch during a double shift. That's not a disorder. It's exhaustion. Yes, I raised my voice when I was shouted at in front of others. Yes, I feel anxiety because my husband tracked me and sent men to my sister's house. Every answer tightened Priya's smile. Cole's attorney shifted, sensing their script slipping. Then they pulled out a glossy photo. My Civic, the word grateful scrawled into its dirty side. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true you vandalized your own vehicle for attention? I let the silence stretch, then pulled the precinct report from my folder. This is a police report filed the same day. The tracking device was logged into evidence. You'll find it on page 2. I slid it across the table. If you're implying I injured myself to gain sympathy, I suggest you check the chain of custody. The room fell still. Even Cole's jaw twitched. That small, bureaucratic piece of paper had landed heavier than any accusation. Then came Cole's turn. Watching him answer Priya's questions was like seeing a man tap dance in cement shoes. He dodged, minimized, lied with the easy rhythm of someone who believes the world bends to his narrative. But every denial was met with documentation. Emails, bank statements, the audio from the Airy. Priya pressed play, and his own voice filled the room. Humiliation neutralizes a spouse. Break them in public. No one believes them in private. Cole paled. For a moment, he wasn't the venture capitalist or the golden boy. He was just a man caught mid-performance with the stage lights too bright. When it ended, Priya didn't gloat. She simply asked, Mr. Carter, can you explain why you used those exact words? Cole fumbled. His lawyer objected. The court reporter's fingers flew, immortalizing every stumble. By the end of the session, he looked deflated, slouched in his chair like someone finally realizing gravity applies to him too. As we packed up, he muttered under his breath, low enough he thought no one would hear, "This isn't over." I met his eyes, steady as the opals in my ears. "You're right," I said softly. "It's just beginning." When I walked out into the gray afternoon, the air bit sharp against my skin, but I breathed easier than I had in months. Cole's empire wasn't collapsing in a blaze. It was rotting in plain sight, piece by documented piece. And every word he once used to silence me was now a nail in his own coffin. The news cycle didn't wait for the courts. By Thursday, headlines screamed, "Finance Golden Boy under federal investigation, wife's testimony key." My face appeared in a grainy photo outside the courthouse, navy blazer sharp against the winter slush. Some articles tried to spin me into a tragic archetype. Fragile nurse, poor choices, humiliated spouse. Others painted me a whistleblower, a hero, neither fit. I was just a woman who'd decided not to die quietly in someone else's story. Emma texted me a screenshot of a gossip column that claimed I'd been spotted buying bottles of prescription pills. I laughed out loud in Maeve's kitchen, nearly spilling coffee. God, they're sloppy, I muttered. Maeve leaned over my shoulder. Sloppy and desperate. We'll bury that, too. She started drafting a response plan like it was a nursing care sheet. Symptom, intervention, outcome. That night, the real break came. Evan called from a burner. His voice trembled, not with fear this time, but relief. They've turned on him, Elise. The partners. Cole threw one too many of us under the bus, and now they're lining up to cooperate. You won't be fighting him alone anymore. I pressed the phone tight, the opals warm against my skin. Are they testifying? Worse for him? They're surrendering documents, emails, internal memos, Judith's directives, all of it. I closed my eyes. The empire Cole thought was bulletproof was collapsing from inside. Not because I struck the final blow, but because greed doesn't breed loyalty. He had taught his partners to survive at all costs, and now survival meant feeding him to the fire. By the weekend, Detective Harris confirmed it. Multiple partners had flipped. We're looking at a criminal indictment within weeks, he said. Wire fraud, conspiracy, financial abuse, and the intimidation incident at your sister's house? That'll add a charge. For the first time, I slept. Not long, not deep, but enough to dream without waking in a panic. I dreamed of a hospital corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing, but this time I wasn't running a code. I was walking steady, chart in hand, no one behind me shouting orders. The next morning, Emma called with a voice thick from crying. Mia has been making signs, she said. She hung one on her door, be brave like Aunt Elise. I sank into Maeve's couch, tears rolling hot and relentless. For months I had been documenting, fighting, bracing, and suddenly there it was, the proof I hadn't destroyed myself for nothing, that even in the wreckage, someone younger had found a model for survival. But even as I let myself feel the smallest victory, I knew it wasn't over. Judith hadn't spoken publicly. She was too quiet, and quiet meant she was plotting. Women like her don't vanish, they regroup. And silence in her hands was sharper than glass. The opals burned against my ears like a warning. One more storm was coming. Judith's silence shattered on a Sunday morning. The Denver Post ran a full-page op-ed under her name, dripping with polished venom. A mother's plea for privacy in a time of family crisis. She painted Cole as a victim of overwork, a devoted son and husband, undone by stress. And me? I was a struggling spouse, a woman whose fragility had been exploited by opportunistic outsiders. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Every reader in the city could fill in the blank. I sat at Maeve's kitchen table with the paper spread out, coffee going cold. Emma read over my shoulder, her jaw tight. She's not defending him, she whispered. She's framing you, turning you into the unstable one. Maeve snorted, bitter. Classic gaslight wrapped in charity. That woman could set a house on fire and call it a candlelight vigil. I should have been furious, but all I felt was clarity. Judith wasn't just protecting Cole. She was protecting herself. Those Bird LLCs weren't Cole's invention alone. The jam scribbles, the councilwoman bribes, the security goon at Emma's door, it was all her signature. If Cole burned, Judith's empire went up in smoke with him. By noon, Priya had already drafted a counterpunch. She filed a motion adding Judith as a named co-conspirator in the financial fraud case. If she wants to step into the light, Priya said, we'll turn the spotlight on her. That evening, Evan called again, his voice urgent. You need to hear this. Judith's hosting a closed-door dinner tomorrow at the country club. She's rallying the investors, trying to spin this as an attack on the whole fund. If she convinces them to circle wagons, they'll pool money for Cole's defense and drag this out for years. I gripped the phone, my pulse racing. So she's staging her own performance. Exactly, but here's the thing. One of the servers is fed up. Same kid Cole humiliated last year. He's willing to record. The idea of catching Judith in her own words made my skin prickle. Another layer of proof, another stitch in the wound. But it was dangerous. If she sniffed betrayal, she'd destroy that server the way she tried to destroy me. That night, I lay awake on Maeve's couch, staring at the ceiling fan, the opals cool against my skin. I thought about Judith's op-ed, her careful words about fragile women and family privacy, and I realized she wasn't just trying to erase me. She was laying groundwork to replace me in the narrative. The grieving matriarch, the selfless mother cleaning up her son's mess while the unstable wife collapsed in public. Twist 7 was clear. The final war wasn't just with Cole, it was with Judith. The recording came the next night. Evan slipped it to Priya on a flash drive no bigger than a stick of gum, his hands shaking as if the weight of it was more than plastic. We gathered in Maeve's living room. Me, Priya, Emma, even Detective Harris, who'd come off shift, still smelling, faintly, of stale coffee and polyester. Maeve dimmed the lights like we were about to screen a horror movie. And in a way we were. Judith's voice filled the room, smooth as cream poured over poison. We must protect legacy above all. Cole was careless, yes, but Elise, she's unstable. She has fabricated entire scenarios before. If we position her as hysterical, the public will sympathize with a mother saving her son. Murmurs of agreement, the clink of silverware, then her sharper tone. The partners will contribute to his defense. Loyalty now ensures dividends later. Those who defect, remember, I still know where every body is buried. Silence fell heavy after the recording ended. Emma muttered a curse. Harris exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. She's threatening witnesses on tape. That's obstruction, intimidation, maybe even racketeering. I sat very still, opal studs pressing against my skin, anchoring me. Judith had spoken the quiet part out loud. She'd named me unstable, plotted my erasure, and strong-armed investors into silence. It wasn't just Cole's empire, it was hers, and she'd admit to burning anyone who got in the way. Priya's eyes gleamed like a surgeon glimpsing the tumor clearly on a scan. "This is it," she whispered. "The tape plus Evan's documents plus the financials. We're not just freezing assets. We're detonating their dynasty." For the first time, I didn't feel small in the story. I felt enormous, like my existence alone had cracked their performance. And for once, Judith's polished voice didn't make me want to hide. It made me want to roar. Maeve poured us each a splash of cheap wine into mismatched mugs. "To Elise," she said, raising hers, "the woman who turned humiliation into evidence." I didn't toast, I just whispered, "To endings." But deep down, I knew endings weren't tidy. They came with claws, and Judith, cornered, was about to show hers. The claws showed 2 days later. I was leaving Maeve's building, tote snug against my hip, when a black sedan eased to the curb. Not the SUV from Emma's driveway, sleeker, tinted, too polished to be mistaken for coincidence. The window slid down, and Judith's face appeared. Framed in mink, like the winter itself was her accessory. "Elise," she said, voice calm, almost maternal. "Get in, we should talk." Every instinct screamed no. I kept walking, breath fogging in the air, heels clicking faster on the concrete. But the sedan crawled beside me, Judith's eyes tracking my every move. "You've made your point," she called softly. "Cole's paying his price. But if you drag this further, you'll scorch everyone, yourself included." I stopped, turned, let the cold sting my cheeks. "You mean you?" Her smile flickered, just for a second. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're not built for this, Elise. You're a nurse, a caregiver. You heal, you don't destroy. Leave destruction to people like me." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the record button, and said, "Funny thing, Judith, healing and destroying. They're sometimes the same process. You cut to remove the rot." For the first time, her mask cracked, jaw tight, eyes narrowing into slits. She leaned back and tapped the glass. The sedan pulled away, tires whispering over snow, her shadow shrinking in the side mirror, but her threat thick in the air. When I got upstairs, Maeve was pacing. What the hell happened? "She wanted me to stop," I said, still trembling. "She told me I wasn't built for destruction." Maeve's mouth hardened. "Then she's never seen a nurse in a trauma ward." That night, Priya filed a supplemental motion attaching the recording from the country club. Federal investigators added obstruction to Judith's list of sins. And me? I lay awake on Maeve's couch, staring at the ceiling fan blades slicing the dark, realizing the truth. The humiliation at the Eyrie was never the end of my story. It was the opening act. And the final act wasn't about Cole anymore. It was about dismantling the empire Judith built on cruelty disguised as legacy. The fuse was lit, and this time I wasn't afraid of the fire. The trial date loomed like a storm cloud, but before the courthouse lights ever flicked on, the world had already started passing judgment. News anchors replayed the country club recording in grim loops, Judith's velvet voice dripping poison, her promises of dividends for loyalty. Commentators leaned in with relish. This is more than financial misconduct. It's generational corruption. At Maeve's, the phone buzzed constantly. Emma called every night, voice half steel, half worry. Don't back down, Elise, even if she threatens you again. Mia sent me doodles. Stick figure me holding a sword labeled Truth and a cartoon Cole with his pants on fire. Those drawings sat taped to Maeve's fridge like battle banners. Priya arrived one morning, laptop under one arm, thermos in the other. She set down a stack of new evidence, her eyes bright. The feds found offshore accounts tied directly to Judith, wire transfers routed through Cayman shells, all authorized with her initials. And here's the kicker. Some of that money came from a retirement trust meant for widows of fallen firefighters. If this hits open court, she's done. I stared at the papers, bile in my throat. She stole from widows? Worse, Priya said grimly. She weaponized grief to fund her empire. That afternoon, Detective Harris stopped by with his weary steadiness. She's unraveling, he said. We've got witnesses flipping on her now, too. Club employees, even one of her assistants. She's threatened too many people, left too many scars. The walls are closing in. But Judith wasn't finished. She staged one last spectacle. The evening news broadcast footage of her holding a press conference outside her foundation's glass tower. She wore pearls, sharp as knives, reporters clustering like moths. This is nothing more than a witch hunt fueled by a bitter spouse, she declared, voice carrying over microphones. Elise Carter is a disturbed woman, lashing out at a family that gave her everything. I watched on Maeve's couch, fists clenched, opals digging into my earlobes. Maeve muttered, She just hung herself. Calling you disturbed while the evidence screams otherwise? Judges hate that. Priya, standing behind us, smiled for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow we file for expedited proceedings. By trying to bury you, Judith just handed us the shovel. I leaned back, exhaustion heavy, but edged with something like triumph. They had humiliated me, tracked me, shoved me against walls of lies. And now they were choking on their own script. The storm was almost here, but for the first time I wasn't dreading it. I was ready to walk straight into the downpour. The courthouse smelled of bleach and nerves. Reporters clogged the steps like vultures with microphones, their questions slicing the cold air. Elise, do you regret coming forward? Did you fabricate the harassment claims? How unstable are you, really? Priya's hand pressed firm against my back as she ushered me inside, her whisper sharp, Do not give them oxygen. Inside the hearing room buzzed. Cole sat at the defendant's table, jaw tight, suit rumpled. His eyes flicked toward me, desperate for a flicker of weakness he could exploit. But when he saw me standing steady in my navy blazer, opals glinting under the fluorescent lights, his gaze broke away. Judith sat behind him, pearls gleaming like armor, her face the picture of composed disdain. She didn't even look at me, like I was an insect beneath notice. But her clenched fists betrayed her. Priya opened with precision. She laid out the evidence like surgical instruments. The Shell LLCs with my home as address, Evan's testimony, Henry's footage, the harassment report, the country club tape, each piece a blade cutting through their defense. Then she played the audio of Cole's voice, steady and cruel. Humiliation neutralizes a spouse. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cole shifted in his chair, color draining from his face. Judith's attorneys tried to pivot. They painted me fragile, vindictive, a nurse too emotional to be credible. But Priya sliced their arguments apart. She held up my spotless employment record, letters from patients' families, testimony from colleagues. This is not a fragile woman, she said, her voice resonant. This is a professional who documents, who heals, who survived intimidation and assault. And she is the one who had the courage to expose a dynasty of fraud. When Evan took the stand, his voice cracked as he admitted his role. I enabled it, he said, tears slicking his eyes. But when I saw Elise humiliated in that restaurant, I couldn't stay silent. Judith told us to destroy her credibility. I have the emails to prove it. He handed them over. And with that, the last domino fell. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. The motion to freeze assets is granted. Proceedings will advance with evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and intimidation. This court will not tolerate attempts to silence witnesses. Cole slumped, shoulders caving inward. Judith's mask cracked for the first time. Her lips thinned, eyes narrowing with unmasked fury. For decades, she'd orchestrated every room she entered. Now, under buzzing fluorescent lights, the script was no longer hers. I walked out past the reporters, head high, opals burning warm against my ears. I didn't answer their questions. I didn't need to. The story was no longer what they called me. The story was what Judith and Cole had done, and the proof that they couldn't bury it anymore. The night after the hearing, Maeve insisted we celebrate, even if celebration meant microwaved lasagna and a bottle of red poured into chipped mugs. Emma and Mia came over, their laughter filling the apartment like oxygen after months of stale air. For the first time in forever, I wasn't holding my breath. Mia plopped down beside me on the couch, rabbit tucked under her arm, eyes shining. "Mom says you're like a superhero," she whispered. "You don't wear a cape, but you fight villains." I smiled through tears. "Superheroes don't always fly, kiddo. Sometimes we just refuse to stay down." I unclasped my opal studs and pressed them into her small hand. "These belonged to your great-grandmother. She wore them when she needed courage. Tonight, they're yours." Her gasp was pure wonder. Emma shook her head, tears catching the kitchen light. "Elise?" "No," I said firmly. "They've carried me far enough. It's time they help the next brave girl." Later, after everyone left, Priya called. Her voice was steady, but edged with triumph. "The feds are drafting indictments. Judith will be named. Cole, too. Wire fraud, obstruction, intimidation, the works." She paused. "You understand, Elise. You've not just secured yourself. You've dismantled an empire." I sat in the quiet, lasagna scent, still hanging in the air, and let her words sink in. Not secure yet, not fully safe, but no longer invisible, no longer erased. For months, I had been surviving on documentation, on stitches of evidence. Now, the wound was turning into a scar, ugly, permanent, but proof that I lived. I stepped out onto Maeve's tiny balcony. Denver's skyline glittered in the cold night, a city buzzing with stories I'd never know. For the first time, mine didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a warning. And maybe, just maybe, a kind of victory. Twist 8 wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About finding out that survival isn't quiet. It roars. The indictments dropped on a Tuesday morning. I was back at the clinic charting vitals when my phone exploded with notifications. Cole and Judith, both formally charged. Wire fraud, elder financial abuse, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Their names scrolled across the TV in the waiting room. Faces once grinning in society pages, now frozen in mugshots. Cole's jaw looked slack, like he'd swallowed too much of his own arrogance. Judith's pearls were gone. The camera caught only her eyes, flat and furious. Patients whispered about it between blood draws and checkups. One elderly woman, Mrs. Alvarez, patted my hand and said, "I saw you on TV. You're brave, mija. Don't let them take that from you." I excused myself to the supply closet and cried, quiet tears that tasted more like release than grief. That evening, Emma cooked stew and Maeve brought bread. We sat around Emma's worn oak table, bowls steaming, the girls' laughter mixing with the clatter of spoons. For the first time, food didn't taste like ash in my mouth. It tasted like safety. But even in victory, shadows lingered. Judith's lawyer filed motions, claiming she was too frail for trial, trying to twist public sympathy. Cole's PR team leaked stories about my vindictive crusade, hoping to soften jurors down the line. The smear campaign still hissed through the airwaves, a reminder that winning legally didn't mean silence culturally. I looked around Emma's table, at Mia wearing my opals, at Maeve cracking jokes to cover exhaustion, at Emma's tired eyes that still burned with pride, and I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It belonged to all of us. Every woman who'd been humiliated in a dining room, erased in a boardroom, shoved into silence. When I left that night, Emma hugged me hard at the door. "It's almost over," she whispered. "No," I said, voice steady, hand on her shoulder. "It's almost beginning." Because surviving wasn't the end of my story. Building something better, on the ashes of their empire, that was the real ending I wanted. The sentencing hearing was scheduled 6 months later, but by then the city had already moved on to fresher scandals. For me, though, time didn't dull the edge. It honed it. Every day until that date felt like standing at the top of a long corridor, walking toward a door I had waited too long to close. When the day came, I sat in the gallery, hands folded in my lap, heart steady but alive with sparks. Cole entered first, thinner now, his expensive suits replaced by state-issued gray. He still tried to scan the room for control, but his eyes skipped past me like I was air. Judith followed, supported by 2 aides, her pearls traded for plastic ID bracelets. Even stripped of her armor, she carried herself like a queen who thought the court owed her fealty. Victim impact statements began. Evan spoke, voice trembling, about the guilt of enabling fraud. An elderly widow described selling her home after years of management fees bled her dry. Emma testified too, recounting the night the so-called security guard shoved her in front of Mia. Her voice was clear as glass. They thought intimidation could erase truth. They were wrong. When my turn came, I stood at the podium, opals warm against my skin. My voice didn't shake. They tried to humiliate me into silence. They turned my birthday into a spectacle, my marriage into a contract, my body into evidence of their violence. But humiliation didn't erase me. It remade me. And every time they told me I should be grateful, I remembered. Gratitude doesn't belong to tyrants. It belongs to survival. The judge listened, pen still, gaze unflinching. And then she delivered the sentence. 15 years for Cole, 20 for Judith. No suspended time, no country club prison, real consequences. Gasps rippled through the room, but I just sat, exhaling slowly, as if I'd been holding my breath for years, and could finally let it go. Outside the courthouse, microphones swarmed again, but this time I didn't stop. I walked straight through the crowd, Emma and Maeve on either side, Mia running to catch up. For the first time, I wasn't the woman abandoned at a dinner table. I was the woman who had burned the table down. That night at Emma's, we ate lasagna and laughed until our cheeks hurt. Mia leaned against me, whispering, "You're free now." And for once, I believed her. Freedom didn't arrive like a parade. It came in small, startling ways. The first morning after sentencing, I woke to silence. Not the heavy silence of dread, but the soft quiet of a life no longer stalked by his shadow. I brewed coffee in a chipped mug. No precision measurements, no Venetian cups. Just the way I liked it. I took that first sip and realized it was the best coffee I'd had in years. Not because of beans, but because no one was standing over me, judging. At work, colleagues stopped tiptoeing around me. They left sticky notes on my locker. "Proud of you. You made us braver." Parents sent cards thanking me for showing our daughters that survival isn't shameful. My students didn't understand headlines, but they knew when I was smiling more. "Miss Carter," one boy said, tugging my sleeve, "you laugh louder now." That was the truest verdict of all. Maeve kept insisting I move out of her apartment, but I wasn't ready for permanence yet. Instead, I rented a tiny studio, peeling paint, crooked floorboards, but mine. I filled it with thrift store furniture and sunlight. Emma helped me hang curtains. Mia drew a sign for the door. "Brave girls live here." At night I wrote, pages and pages, not court documents, not affidavits, just me, telling the story in my own words. Sometimes it came out like a diary, sometimes like a letter to the girl I used to be, the one who thought humiliation was the price of love. I wasn't writing for revenge anymore. I was writing to remember, to make sure no woman after me mistook cruelty for devotion. One evening, I fastened my jewelry box shut. The opals weren't there. They'd found a new home with Mia. But inside was my grandmother's note, the one she'd tucked with them decades ago. For my brave girl. Wear them when you need strength. I touched the paper, folded soft with age, and whispered, "I did, Grandma. I did." And I realized then, the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. About taking back birthdays, mornings, names. About turning survival into something that looked suspiciously like joy. Months passed, and life began to stretch into something that resembled normal, but not the old normal. This was new terrain, scarred, but fertile. I no longer jumped at every unknown number on my phone. I no longer scanned parking lots for black sedans. Instead, I learned to linger in grocery aisles, choosing fruit by smell instead of price, humming under my breath without fear someone would mock me for being provincial. Emma teased me for becoming domestic again. "You're nesting," she laughed as I planted herbs on the crooked balcony of my studio. Maybe I was. But this time it wasn't about performance or presentation. It was about claiming space. Even a cracked flower pot felt like victory. One Saturday, Maeve and I went to the Airy, not to eat, but to return. Henry spotted me immediately and ushered us to a quiet corner. "Your table," he said softly, "is yours forever. No charge." The staff who'd once watched in silence now greeted me with nods of respect. As I sipped water and looked around the room that had once been my crucifixion, I felt nothing but distance. The scene of my humiliation had become the setting of my survival. That night, back home, I opened the binder Priya had returned after the trial, thick with filings, transcripts, evidence. For months, it had been my shield. Now, it felt like a tombstone. I closed it and slid it onto the highest shelf, not to forget, but to keep in its place. The fight was over. I was alive. That was enough. The next morning, I walked into my classroom and saw the banner still hanging. "Welcome back, Miss Carter." My students had refused to take it down. Glitter flaked onto my shoulders as I sat at my desk, their chatter swirling like music. "Who wants to tell me what bravery looks like today?" I asked, and 28 small hands shot up at once. For the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor telling a story of pain. I felt like a teacher again. And maybe that was the bravest ending of all. Summer crept in, hot and golden, and with it came a restlessness I hadn't felt in years. Freedom wasn't just surviving, it was deciding what came next. I took long drives into the mountains on weekends, windows down, music loud, hair whipping free, no texts demanding where I was, no calendar invites disguised as obligations, just air and road. One evening, parked at a scenic overlook, I pulled out a notebook and began sketching ideas. Not medical charts or legal notes this time, just dreams. A support group for women leaving toxic marriages. A workshop on documenting abuse safely. Maybe even a book, though the idea scared me. My pen moved faster than my doubts, spilling the lessons humiliation had burned into me. Document everything. Build allies. Never confuse cruelty with love. Emma laughed when I told her, "Of course you'll do it. You've always been the one to turn chaos into instructions." Maeve added, "And you have receipts. The world listens harder when you've got proof." Mia chimed in from the couch. Rabbit still clutched, though she was nearly too old for it. "You should call it the Brave Girls Club." We all laughed, but the name stuck in my chest like a seed. Meanwhile, the headlines about Cole and Judith faded, replaced by fresher scandals. Occasionally, someone would stop me at the market or outside the clinic. "Aren't you that woman?" they'd ask. And I'd smile, shake my head, and say, "No, I'm just Elise." Because that's who I was again. Not someone's humiliation, not someone's case file, just me. One night, as I sat on my crooked balcony watching the city lights blink awake, I realized the truth. Revenge had never been the prize. Peace was. And I had finally, stubbornly, beautifully found it. The anniversary of that birthday dinner arrived like a shadow on the calendar. Emma wanted to take me out. Maeve suggested a girls' night, but I chose something quieter. I booked a single table at a small diner near the hospital. Fluorescent lights, chipped mugs, nothing glamorous. I ordered pancakes and black coffee, sat alone, and let myself remember. Not to wallow, but to measure the distance. A year ago, I'd been humiliated in front of 17 people, left with a bill bigger than my rent, and a sentence that still echoed, "A woman like you should be grateful I even looked your way." Now, sitting in that diner, fork cutting through warm pancakes, I whispered to myself, "I'm grateful I looked my own way." And it was true. Halfway through breakfast, my phone buzzed. A message from Priya. Case closed. Restitution distributed. Survivors paid back. I stared at the words until the letters blurred, then laughed out loud, startling the waitress. "Good news?" she asked, topping off my mug. "The best," I said. I walked out into the morning sun, the air bright and ordinary. No cameras, no courtrooms, no chains. Just the hum of traffic, the smell of syrup clinging to my sweater, the taste of freedom in my mouth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying a story of survival. I felt like I was carrying a future. Life after war isn't dramatic. It's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. But quiet can be its own revolution. I settled into routines that once felt impossible. Morning runs along the river, coffee brewed without precision, laughter echoing in my classroom without the undertone of dread. The crooked little studio blossomed with herbs and thrift store furniture, and every squeaky drawer felt like triumph. Maeve teased me for getting boring. Emma said boring was the best kind of peace. Mia still wore the opals sometimes, declaring they gave her superpowers before exams. Watching her twirl in front of Emma's mirror, I knew I'd passed something stronger than jewelry down. I'd passed the lesson that no girl should ever accept cruelty as love. One evening, I stood on my balcony as the city lit up in fractured gold. I thought of Cole behind bars, Judith stripped of her empire, their dynasty reduced to court transcripts and headlines already fading. They had tried to script my humiliation as the climax of my life. Instead, it became the prologue. I whispered into the night, not for them, but for myself. I was always somebody. You just needed me to forget. And I smiled because forgetting was no longer an option. So here I am, 1 year later, telling you this story not as a victim, not as a shadow of someone else's empire, but as myself, Elise Carter, the woman who was humiliated, erased, shoved aside, and who chose to rise anyway. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence protects the cruel, but truth arms the brave. And when you speak your truth, when you gather every scrap of evidence, every witness, every ounce of courage, you don't just survive, you win. If my story kept you holding your breath, please take a second right now to breathe with me, and then hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs strength tonight, and ring the notification bell so you'll never miss another story like this. And don't go far, because in the next episode, I'll tell you about another marriage where secrets hid not in a bank account, but in a locked basement. And the night those secrets clawed their way into the light will leave you speechless.